All right, and can everyone see my screen, my desktop here? All right, great. Looks like we've gotten everything under control here. Okay. All right, hopefully you should see Blackboard coming up on the screen. Can everybody see Blackboard? All right, great. All right, so let's get rolling. Let's get to the good stuff. Good evening. Thank you guys all for joining me here this evening for our second of our 2 stats labs. I do not have all of the stats labs assignments graded yet. Some of you may have yours back. Not all of them are done. I was hoping to have them all done by our session tonight, but that did not happen. I will have them done hopefully within the next 24 to 48 hours. Have a pretty busy end of the week, so maybe a little bit longer than that. I was hoping to get them back to you before the due date for the next assignment, but that may not happen. So I would encourage you to go ahead and get your next assignment in. If you have any specific questions, you can send me an email or ask them this evening. I'm also trying to get caught up on email correspondence. So if you've sent me an email and I haven't responded yet, I apologize again. I'm trying to get caught up. So, are there any? Does anyone have any general questions that they would like to ask at this time before we get started? Okay, it doesn't seem like it. And if you do, if you come up with a question, please feel free to let me know. Here we are in we're in week 7 of the class, experimental research. Last week was week 6, which was also experimental research. Last week we did homework number 4, and this week we'll be turning in homework number 5. And this is where you find homework number 5 inside your week 7 modules. You just click on that, and you're going to do your assignment. Lay out here which assignments there are to do. My audio is really low. I'm not sure how to change that. Maybe I'll talk louder. And that will help. Because I don't believe I have a volume button. Anyway. Okay, give me a minute here to look around and see if I can change the volume setting. And go to meeting. All right, I'm not sure what's going on. I'll just try to speak louder, and hopefully that will help. All right. Does anyone else have any general questions about the class? Just want to make sure I didn't miss something before we get started. Your homework 5 is here in the folder, so you're just going to go ahead and download that and do the exercises. And then tonight we'll have some sample exercises as well, just like we did last week. Hopefully that'll help with the preparation of your homework for next week. All right. Today we're going to start out in chapter 3 in the textbook. If you're following along with me in the textbook at home. Chapter 3, exercise number 4 is going to be the first one that we'll look at. And that is on page 72 of your book if you're following along. All right, again, as you may recall from last week, there's several different ways to get into our SPSS program. And depending on what type of computer you have and what version of your software you're running, can be several different ways. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just go in and going to open up SPSS. We'll give it just a second to load. There we go. All right. What I'm going to do is I see here from my example exercise that we're going to do tonight, practice 3, number 4, it is asking me to open up the data that we're in. This is it the 6 10? Hang on just a second. Yes, it is the state 10. We're going to go ahead and open up the state 10 data set. Okay, I don't want to go any further until I can ensure that everybody can hear me okay. What I might do is I might try to call back in. So if everybody can hang on just for a second, I'm going to hang up and I'm going to call back in and see if that helps. So hang on just a second. Okay, I called back in to see if that might help, so hopefully it will, but Michael had a good idea. If you have a volume control on your speakers and you can turn that up, that might help as well. It may have just been that for whatever reason we had a bad phone line connection before. It sounds like it's probably better now. So, all right, so back to the business here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open my file. From the SPSS panel itself. So I'm just going to select the file that I want, which is the state 10. I can see the file extension here. State 10 is the one I want. And I'm going to go ahead and open it. All right, and now we have our data set open. It automatically opens it up in the variable view, but we can also switch over to data view and make sure everything came in the way that it wants to. And go back to variable view. I just want to make sure this is the data set that I want to be in here. So I'm going to look for this variable that is asking us to look up, which is HTH. 507. And there it is. All right, so that's the variable we are going to be doing some exploring with here. Let's close this out now. Now, there's a couple different ways in SPSS to get to the same information. But if you're new to SPSS and you really are just trying to make sure you get the assignment done and get the assignment done properly, then I encourage you to go ahead and follow the directions the way that it specifies in the book. If you know the different way to do this, that gets you the information a little bit quicker, then please feel free to do that as well. If you do have questions on an assignment in the homework, though, and there was a perfect example of this week, I was working with a student who was having a really hard time with one of the questions in the homework, and she didn't have syntax files, so it was hard for her and I to communicate about what the problem was with her assignment. So she went back in and she ran her analysis again, and she sent me her syntax file, and it was really easy for me to identify from that where the problem was. So again, I encourage you to be keeping those syntax files, and if you do have a problem in the homework, if you can provide that information to me, it can help me be a little bit more helpful to you. So Chapter 3, Question 4 here. Oops, I was looking at the wrong variable. Chapter 3, Question 4 on page 72 wants us to determine the measures of central tendency and spread for the variable CRC192. It's asking us to examine statistics and the box plot and determine which measures of central tendency and spread are most appropriate. So keep in mind there's two components to this question here. The first one is that we have to run the analyses, and the second part of it is a little bit more analytical on our part. We have to determine which measures of central tendency and spread are most appropriate. And it tells us in this book here, in our book, how to decide those things for a particular variable. So make sure that you read the preliminary information in the chapter to help you learn how to decide that. We are discussing Chapter 3, Question 4. Does that jive with the information you have? Because there actually was an old version of this floating around, and I just want to ensure that students are looking at the same questions that I am. Okay, good deal. And also, as you can probably see, there's a lot of example questions to get through tonight, so we probably won't get through all of them. So if there are particular questions that you have, then we can open it up and discuss those. If students would like me to focus on one more than another, we can definitely do that. Now, keep in mind the questions that we're going over in the session tonight are not the homework assignment questions. They are in the Stats Lab assignment questions. There's two different things. So your homework assignments are Chapter 3, Exercise 6, Chapter 4, Exercise 2 and 7, Chapter 5, Exercises 1, 2, and 3. But we won't go over those in the Stats Lab. We'll just go over some similar examples, and then it's up to you to in the homework to take in and do the ones that are assigned. So the Stats Lab assignments were in, let's see if I can find it quickly, are in this document here. That should tell you what questions we're going to go over tonight. And I'm getting a little bit of background noise, so just everyone make sure your mic is muted. That would be good. Thanks. Okay, back over to our data set here. All right, we are going to go up to Data and Explore. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to flip back to your chapter and talk about where this is. Okay, I apologize. I'm back in. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay, great. I'm sorry, there must be something very weird going on with the GoToMeetings audio tonight, so let's try this again. Okay, please, if you are not asking a question, yes, remember to hit your mute button. There's a mute button on the screen, and there's also probably one on your phone device. If you're calling in on the phone, you can use that to mute as well. It just keeps a lot of the background noise down when everybody's on mute unless you need to speak. And I'm glad that everybody can hear me now, and I apologize for the glitches. I'm not sure what the problem is tonight. All right, so what we're working on, or we're trying to work on anyway here, is Chapter 3, Number 4, which is using Explore to determine and measure the central tendency and spread for a particular variable. So what we've done is we've opened our data set, our States 10 data set, and we're going to go ahead and go up to Analyze and Explore, and then we're going to move that particular variable that we're interested in looking at into the dependent list. So our variable is juvenile arrest rate per 100,000. So we're going to find that per 100,000 for violent crimes in 2008. All right, we want to display both dot. And we can take a look at these just to see if there's any information we might want to include or exclude. It's been a while since I've looked at these. So we want the stem and leaf plot. We want the box plot. That's what the instructions tell us to do. So it looks like we're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paste that into my syntax. And I'm going to run it from there. Remember, another option is just to click OK. But this way, if you have it in your syntax file, if you're having problems, I can easily take a look and be able to help you out that way. All right, here is our output file. It's letting us know that this case processing summary, again, is just giving us an overview of all the cases. Remember here that our unit of analysis in this particular data set are states. Okay, they're not individual people, they're states over here. The row indicates our unit of analysis. So those are our states. Oh. Sorry, guys, I have to find where my output went. There we go. Okay. So 48 of them reported on this particular variable. 3 did not for whatever reason. Okay, for a total of 51 states in our variable set. Here's all this descriptive information that our assignment is asking us to report. Okay, so our mean is 244. Gives us our confidence intervals, even a trimmed mean. So you can see this Explore function gives us a lot more information than what this is asking us for, but it can be helpful. So now you'll know where to find it. It also tells us the median, the standard deviation, our interquartile range. And for a definition of what all those things are, remember to read the chapter, the chapter that goes along with the text, because that is what you're going to need to do your own analyses of which measure of central tendency you would use for this particular data set. And it's asking you to circle the measure that you would use for this particular variable and also the measure of spread. Keep in mind, those are going to be different for each of your variables. It's not always going to be the same one. You're going to need to know, according to the criteria, which one of those to use. And sometimes the answer may not be black or white, right or wrong. You might be able to use more than one type if a particular variable is lending itself to being evenly distributed in that way. And then you're also going to need to tell me a little bit about why you made those selections. Let's see here, and we can do that. One of the ways we can do that is by looking at our box plot. Okay, these are our data points plotted out in our box plot, and they show our outliers up here. Okay. We can also see that by analyzing the stem and leaf plot here. And that Explore tab is nice because it gives us all of that information right in one place for measures of central tendency. Okay, so when I'm doing an analysis of these data in particular, I'm looking here and I can see that the mean is 244.6, or 0.7 if we were to round, okay? My standard deviation is 135. So my standard deviation in this case seems pretty large relative to my mean. I mean, it's pretty large relative to my mean, okay? So that's kind of one red flag that I might have some outliers going on there. And I can look down here and I can see them in my box plot that I definitely do, okay? So I have some people, let's see, cases 8, 21, 19, hanging out pretty far above my average, and that's likely pulling my average up, and it's going to be skewing my measures of central tendency, right? So we know in that case that our average or our mean may not be the most appropriate measure of central tendency to use in this case. If we look down here, if we look at our median, we can also compare our median and see that our median is several points below or different than our mean. And that's likely because those outliers are dragging our mean up, okay? If you look at where our trimmed mean is, we can see that if we take out those outliers, it brings our average more in alignment or closer to our median or our split point here. So this would be some of the rationale that you would use when looking to see which of these measures would be most appropriate to use, and also in your explanation of why you chose what you chose. All right, any questions on that? Okay, as I mentioned, there's a lot of example exercises for week 7 tonight, so I'm not going to try to go through all of them. Chapter 3, number 4 is, I'm sorry, that's what we just did. Chapter 3, number 4 is the one we just did. Chapter 3, number 5 is very similar to Chapter 3, number 4. So we're going to go ahead and not do that one unless there's any particular questions or concerns with that. It's very much the same way that you're going to have to do yours. All right. We will move on then to Chapter 4, number 1. Question number 1. That is on page 93, if you're following along in your book. I'm going to go ahead and close this one out. As I mentioned, one of the most difficult things when you have lots of different files open is kind of file management. So I don't like to leave too much extraneous stuff open because then I get confused trying to toggle back and forth. SPSS will let you open more than one data set at a time, but it starts to get tricky when you're doing the analyses to make sure you're doing the analyses in the appropriate data set. So I would recommend just, closing stuff out as you're done with it. Make sure you save it if you need to, but just to minimize the confusion, I like to close stuff out. All right. This chapter starts out by asking us to build some new variables. And this is incredibly helpful skill to learn. I don't think I've ever done a research project or gotten a data set that I haven't had to go in and create my own variables. The data sets will come with all of these variables in here, but it usually, as a researcher, to be able to answer your research question, you're going to need to come up with other variables in order to answer your question, and you can do that very easily here in SPSS. Chapter 4, question 1 is asking us in the States 10 data, which we're already in, so we don't have to open a new data set, to generate a new variable with murders as a percentage of violent crimes. So what we're going to do is we are going to go in and we're going to compute that. We have the two variables that we need in order to do that. All we have to do is we have to input the correct formula in the correct way, and SPSS will calculate that for all of our cases for us. And then we can go in and we can get our descriptive statistics on our newly created variables. So we're going to go in, transform, compute. Okay. Our target variable is murd %, and the book tells us that. We can go type and label. We can label it. It's going to be numeric, so we continue. Okay, and then what we can do is we can either choose our variables over here from the drop-down menu, or if we have them and we know them, we can just type them right into our numeric expression. All of this stuff here is really helpful and useful if you need it, the different functions, the different little calculator buttons, but it's also really easy just to type it in for something as simple as this exercise is asking. It's asking us for CRS 37 divided by CRS 33 times 100. Okay, I just typed all that in from my keyboard. Again, you can go over here and choose variables and just pop them over if you want, but we don't need to do that in this case. We don't need to use any of these functions, special variables, anything like that. This if button down here is really helpful. If you only want to include certain cases, you can do that, but we don't need to do that, and you won't need to do that in your homework. It's just some more of the advanced functions that you can do with SPSS if need be. All right, so it looks like we have everything that we need to go ahead and paste this into our syntax. Open our syntax file, and we're going to go ahead and run it. Okay, so as you can see here, our output is just basically giving us what our syntax said, because there's really nothing to print out yet. There's no output to be generated, because all we've done is we've gone in and created a new variable. If we click over here to our data set, we can be sure that we created that variable by scrolling over to the very end of our data set and making sure it's there. And look, there it is. Okay, and we can kind of eyeball it. This is a pretty small number of variables, cases, so we can kind of eyeball and see that everything seemed to work out pretty well. Okay, so far so good. Step one, everything looks like it looks pretty good. All right, but the next thing that we need to do is we need to go in and we need to get what these descriptives are for this new variable. So we can go in and we can do that several different ways. Let's do frequencies. All right. We go all the way down. You know it's our murders as a %. This is the one we want to explore. And it's also asking us for a mean. We could check these other things if we wanted to find out more information. Paste that into my syntax, and I'm going to run it. And there we go. Okay. So now we have the information that we need to answer the question. Okay, let me see the question that Mark's asking over here. For homework question number 7. two variables are recoded into a new variable, following the instructions to use those two. Okay, it looks like actually Dennis may have the clue. You need to do parts 5 and 6 before moving on to 7. Hang on here, let's open the assignment, see what it says. Okay, so now we're talking about, are you talking about chapter 4, number 7, or chapter 5, number 7? Chapter 4, number 7. Okay. Yes. So you would have to complete those other steps first. Okay, Mark, I think maybe let's hang out after class if you need to, because I'm having a hard time understanding what your specific question is. And so it might be more helpful to move on with the example for tonight, and then we can talk about it, because I don't want to get too distracted trying to look back at the homework question. And yeah, that would be good. Okay. All right, let's move into chapter 4, question 3. All right. Sometimes we need to collapse categories into a different variable of more limited categories. So whereas before we just created a brand new variable with new information, sometimes we may want to take information that's already in the data set and collapse it down into fewer categories. This would be the case when we have like a variable that has continuous level data in it. So maybe dollar amounts or temperature or things like that. And if say we want to have maybe only like 4 or 5 categories of that instead, for whatever reason, because it's going to help us answer our research question a little bit better. We can do that with SPSS, which is kind of handy, kind of nice. So this particular one is asking us now to open the GSSO8 data set. So we're going to want to go in. Make sure we're opening the correct data set. Give it a minute. All right, there we go. Now, as you can see, we have the GSSO8 and we have the states 10. So I'm done with states 10. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of it. I'm not going to keep this that I created. You can decide whether or not you want to save a new file, save as, but I'm not going to keep it. I'm just going to close it out. And then I'm going to open my GSS08 back up so that way I can do this next exercise. All right, what we're going to need to do this time is not compute, but we need to transform, because we're going to take the information that's in an existing variable and we're going to change it. Okay? But we want to also maintain the original variable. We don't want to overwrite it. We want to create a new variable and transform the information into a new one. So we're going to go to transform, recode into different variables, and then we're going to tell the, again, we're basically telling SPSS right here, we're writing the code for what we want it to do. And it's asking us to look at the highest degree earned. That's the variable of interest for this particular variable set. So I don't think that's it. It is degree 3 that we're looking for. I thought it was up there at the top. Oh, right there next to it. I missed it. I knew it was right there. Okay. All right. So we've now moved that over to tell it this is the one that we want to transform. Now what we need to do is we need to tell SPSS what the new transformed variables characteristics are going to be. And here in the assignment, it's telling us to name it degree 3. Okay. And it's also telling us that the label is highest degree earned 3 categories. Okay. Now it's kind of tricky because we have to click change in order for degree 3 over here to be moved over there. All right. So keep that in mind. You have to hit that change button or it'll kind of freeze and stop letting you do things. All right. Now what we need to do is we need to tell it what the old and the new values are. All right, and this is where it can get a little bit tricky. You'll need to go into your variable first and know what all of the values in your variable are, okay? So for this particular one, what I would have done first is I would have gone and I would have done analyze, descriptive statistics, frequency. Let me just go ahead and do that as to show you guys how I would have done that first. Okay, we're going to do a little bit, we're going to examine this variable first before we do the transformation, and that way we can get the information that we need in order to do the transformation. All right, so here we can see what the categories are in this variable. Looks like less than high school, junior college, bachelor, graduate, total, and don't know. All right, so those are the categories that we have that we're trying to collapse them down. We don't want so many categories. We're really only interested in having, for whatever reason, for our analysis or for our report that we're writing, we're really only interested in having 3 categories. So now we know what we're working with, what we've got to collapse down to. So we can come back over to our transform, recode into different variable. Make sure you click a different one because if you do same, it'll overwrite that particular variable. I'm going to move our variable in there that we're trying to recode, put our output variable. Okay, we'll just abbreviate that. Hit change, and there we go. Okay, and now we know what our old and our new values are based on that output that we printed over here. Okay, these are our old values wherever our output went. Well, let's not popping it up, but those are our old values on our output. So those are the ones we need to change. We collapse down into the 3 categories that it's telling us to here in the book. So it's telling us to code individuals who earn less than a high school degree as a 1. So we're taking a string variable and we're changing it into a numeric. Okay? High school or junior college, they want to collapse into a single category instead of 2 categories as number 2. Bachelor degree or graduate degree, they want to collapse into a single category as code 3. Okay? It's also telling us to be sure that we're adding variable label and value labels And again, make sure we're checking our variable construction against the original variable, which is what we did in the first step there, where we just examined the values in the first variable. All right, so the old value was less than high school. And we want to change that into a 1 and add, okay? High school or junior college is a 2 and add. So we have to do that for high school and for junior college is now a 2. Okay. Wanted us to collapse bachelor degree and graduate degree. And it also had some other values, the inapplicable, don't know, and not applicable were 7, 8, and 9. But we don't want to add those. Uh-oh, my internet is, looks like it's asking me for some information here. Hang on just a second. Uh-oh. I think I'm still connected to the internet. I don't know why it's asking me for this. Okay. All right, we're going to hit continue. And again, we don't need the if or anything like that, but if there were, we only wanted to select certain cases, then we would choose that if. But this is something that I'm definitely going to paste into my syntax, because this is when we're starting to get a little bit more complicated and we can start to have some errors. And I'm going to run it from there. All right. Now, again, you're only going to see the output here is basically the same thing that was in our syntax, because it's only just created the transformed variable. What we have to do now is we have to go in and look at that transformed variable. Oops, I don't want to do that one. We can get rid of that one because we already did it. We can look at our brand new variable we just made. And see what we've got. All right. So it's basically taken and it's collapsed our categories from up here into these new categories here. Okay. So we still have less than high school, still 297, that first one. The high school and the junior college are now collapsed into this category here. And our last two categories from up here, these two, are now collapsed into our third category there. All right. Okay, Jennifer asked a question if there's any way to easily search for a variable as opposed to scrolling down. The only thing that I would suggest doing that might make it a little bit more helpful, and again, it depends on how much you're working in your data set, is you can go and you can change how the data are displayed. And I may have to get back with you on how to do that because it's different in the Mac than it is in the Windows. You can change it so that it's in alphabetical order, if that makes sense. So at least you know how far down you need to scroll to look for something that starts with an H as opposed to an L, as opposed to a P. Does that make sense? The way that that is useful. The way that it has it now, it does it in order of how the variables are created. So I usually have it like that because, as I mentioned, I create usually a lot of variables in a particular data set, and I know that the last variable that I've created is all the way at the very end of the data set. See how that brand new one we just created is all the way down there at the bottom? So it really just depends on, you know, what would be more useful for you, is if you want to have it in order, that type of order, or just in alphabetical order. But I can definitely see how alphabetical order would be more helpful here. But I don't know where that is in Mac. Does anybody know where that is in Mac? If anybody does, feel free to just chime in. If not, I'll definitely find out. There, Eric's chiming in. Good. Edit options, variable list, display names, alphabetical. There we go. All right. Sounds like we have a winner. Thank you, Eric. Now let's see what it did. Yep, there we go. Now they're in alphabetical order. And if you mouse over them, it should still pop you up the label. Oh, it's not. So you'll need to use the abbreviation as opposed to the label, but that's okay. I feel like that for our purposes, that will definitely be more helpful. All right, any questions on the question we just went over? Okay, we're getting a little short on time. So instead of doing another one from chapter 4, I'm just going to jump right into chapter 5. Oh, Mark's saying you can right-click. Oh, okay, or you can right-click. Does that work on Mac and on Windows with the right-click? Do we know? Oh, awesome. That's pretty easy, an easy trick. Thanks, Mark. All right, great. Learn something new every day. Thank you. Okay, chapter 5. Chapter 5 is kind of our first stab at doing any real type of bivariate analysis. And by that, it's meaning looking at the relationship between two variables. So pretty much everything we've done up to this point is just getting the layout of our SPSS set up, looking at each individual variable, some different descriptive statistics of the univariate analyses. But now what we're going to do is we're going to start to look at maybe making some assumptions about the relationship between two or more variables through our bivariate analysis. We'll be looking at two variables. So let's look at chapter 5, question 1. That is on page 125, if you're following along at home. And this is telling us here that a police force has increased its employment from 5 full-time officers to 8 full-time officers in the effort to deter crime. And they would like to know whether the program has been effective and give us the following outputs to analyze. All right. How would you interpret this crosstab to the police department? This one's actually, this is another one of those where we may not have to do any SPSS analysis to get some information, because it's really giving us what we would find in our output here. It's telling us property crime arrests, violent crime arrests, the number of each of those. So we had 325 in 2009, and we had 375 in 2010. So our property crime arrests have increased by the number of 50. We can see that we can just eyeball and look at it and see there's been an increase between 2009 and 2010. Whereas with our violent crime arrests, in 2009, there were 120 reported, and in 2010, there were 119 reported. So that's actually had a decrease of 1. And it's also giving us some very important information, some statistical information down here at the bottom of the page. It's telling us that the significance level is 0.03. All right, so we can start out by eyeballing, but as we know, statistical analysis is a lot more than what we just see on the paper. We can see that property crime arrests have increased and violent crime arrests have decreased in that time period. So how can we know if the program has been effective? Well, we can use some different statistical analyses to make some actual mathematical sense out of these numbers right here, the numbers for 2009, the numbers for 2010. And without knowing much other information other than our significance value, we can make an assertion as to whether or not we think that crime is being deterred. And there's a significance of 0.03. In the chapter, we talk about p-values and what the p-value means. Typically, in the social sciences, we set that alpha level or that significance level, and this is on page 108 of the textbook, if you haven't had a chance to look it over yet. The significance level is the probability that the patterns in the data are purely by chance, okay? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at our data and determine whether or not what we are seeing is occurring particularly by chance, or in this example here, if the patterns in our data are actually happening because of the police department's effort to deter crime. And we can use our p-value to know the answer to that question. In the social sciences, that value is usually set at 0.05. Sometimes it will be set a little bit higher in social sciences at 0.10. In the natural sciences, it's usually set lower, meaning it's much more difficult to achieve statistical significance. But typically, mostly in the social sciences and education science, those disciplines, it will be set at 0.05. There's actually a place you go in at SPSS and you can change the significance level of your analyses, but I believe its standard is set at 0.05. So we can see here that the significance of this particular analysis is at 0.03, which is smaller than our significance level, our threshold of 0.05. So by that, what we can conclude is that the pattern in our data is not occurring just because of chance, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, good. So you're going to need to kind of have a sense of that concept before you move into the exercises for Chapter 5, because if you look on page 127, it's going to ask us to do some analyses with SPSS and to use those significance values as a threshold or as an indicator of what is going on in our data. So Chapter 5, Example 4, on page 128, is asking us to use the GSSO8 data, and it's asking us to examine the relationship between race and whether someone supports the death penalty. So in our data set here, we have a lot of information about what a person's race is. If you'll notice, our data set here, our unit of analysis is a person, okay, which was different than in our other data set where our unit of analysis was a state. So think about the different level and types of information we can get. We can learn what a person's marital status is, age, educational level, race, etc. So we have some information as to what a person's reported race is categorized here. And we also have some information as to whether or not they support the death penalty for murder, which is another variable. Now, what I would do is I would go in and I would want to do an analysis of those two variables, okay? I would just kind of want to see what's going on with those two different variables. And since we have our handy-dandy variables alphabetized now, we don't have to go looking for a needle in a haystack. I'm just going to move both of those over just to kind of get a sense of what those are. Okay. So here's what my capital punishment variable looks like. It looks like I have about 31% of respondents who oppose it, 62 who favor it, small percentage of my population who answered they didn't know, maybe they didn't have an opinion or wasn't applicable. And then it also tells me here my race of respondent is only broken down by white, black, or other. So just three broad and general categories. 77% of my population is white, 13% is black, 9% reported as other. So now I kind of have a sense of my data. So I can go ahead and fill those out. It's asking me, all right. Now that I kind of know these things, because this is a univariate, the analysis I just did was univariate. I just looked at the characteristics of each of these variables by themselves, right? Now it's asking us to make a prediction. What percent of Americans support the death penalty for murder? Okay, we can make a guess. Maybe our guess falls in line with our results here. Now remember, this is a sample of our population. This is not all Americans. This is just a sample of Americans. Okay, so you may not think that your answer of what percent of Americans supports the death penalty matches up with this one. We're just going to make a prediction based on our frame of reference. And whether or not we think whites and blacks vary in their perspective on this issue. So for this question here, there's not going to be a right or wrong answer. This is going to be your opinion. So now the fun stuff. We got to go in with SPSS, and we're going to find the percentage of whites opposed, the percentage of African Americans opposed, percentage of others opposed. It's asking us for our chi-square significance level and whether or not the relationship is statistically significant. So we know we're going to need to do a chi-square analysis on this one to find our results, all right? And that's going to be under descriptive statistics, crosstabs, okay? When you're thinking about doing crosstabs, how you organize your rows and your columns is completely up to you. Usually I try to think about how it's going to look when the page prints out and put my rows and columns, orient them that way. If you have a variable with a lot of response options, you probably want to make it the row. That way it runs down the page as opposed to across multiple pages. And then you want to put a few in the columns. With these two variables, we don't have very many response options for either of them, meaning race is only has 3 categories, and the position on the death penalty didn't have very many categories. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put them in. I'm going to put them in the column. And I'm going to put race in the row. Again, this doesn't matter in your crosstabs. You can do them either way. Okay. So it's asking us here for the statistics. And we want to make sure that we click that we want the chi-square, because that's what's going to tell us about that chi-square significance level. So we need to make sure that we click that and then click continue. Also, you're going to want to go into cells, and you're going to want to make sure it's asking us for percentage. So you're going to make sure that you want to click percentages for these, because that's going to tell us these questions that we're answering here, okay? And we're going to click paste to move it on to our syntax. And we're going to run it and see what we get. All right. And here's our crosstabs. So this gives us all the information that we need to fill in percentage of whites opposed, percentage of African Americans opposed, percentage of others opposed, and it will also give us our chi-square values, which are over here. Now, what a chi-square test does is it basically calculates where these percentages would fall if the patterns weren't happening purely by chance. Okay, so it calculates all these different matrices based on matrix algebra of where these different percentages theoretically should fall. And if the actual percentages that show up from our data differ from what the theoretical percentages should be, that's when we'll get a significant chi-square value. Okay? And usually with our chi-square values, the bigger they are, the more different the data are. Okay, if that makes sense. So usually big chi-square values are good. It means that you have significant results. And we see here in our significance value that it is 0.000. Okay, that's our p-value. So that means that this relationship is statistically significant in this case. Because our value of 0.00, which is actually, it truncates it, you'll see it's a really small value. Oops. I'm at the pivot table, I just want to look at this value. Oh, it's not showing me what the value is. Oh, there we go. Okay, see, so it's a really, really, really teeny value. Here's the scientific notation of it. But we know that we just need it, we need to know whether or not it's bigger or larger than 0.05 for our particular analysis, and it is definitely smaller. So that means the relationship is statistically significant. Okay? And then we would go in a little bit and discuss how we would interpret those results. You know, that it would be statistically significant that more African Americans oppose the death penalty than individuals who reported that they were white for this particular analysis. Okay, and then we can go back up to our prediction or our hypothesis and see if our prediction or our hypothesis played itself out in the data. All right, and chapter 5, question 6 is actually exactly the same. It's asking you to make a prediction, then to perform your chi-square analysis and interpret the results. So since we're running short on time, I won't go through that one step by step. Are there any questions? No questions, concerns? All right. Mark, if you want to hang around, then, and everybody else, if you don't have any questions, thank you for attending the session tonight, and I will look forward to seeing your assignments when they're submitted. All right, Mark, can you still hear me with all the beeping going on, with people beeping? Okay, good. All right, so your question was on chapter 4, number 7, and I just flipped over to looking at it here, and it looks like, actually, I can understand where there might be a little bit of confusion.
Hey, can you hear me?
I'm sorry?
Oh, you can hear me, okay. I just turned my mic on, I was just making sure it was working.
Oh, okay. I can, yeah.
So basically,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, chapter 4, that was the one that the person before me had ripped all the pages out. So,
okay.
So I did get question 5 and question 6 from someone. The problem I had is trying to, if you go into a I mean, you can do it with anything because you're not going to give me the answers if you do it. But if you try and just go into transform, um, and then you go to yeah, record into different variables, because that's the directions that the question gives you. Then you put the you put num men and num women, but you can choose any. It doesn't really matter. I mean, you're not going to give me the answers either way.
Okay.
But I mean, even with that, I mean, even just doing it like that, and then the the way so you put num men as well is what the way it words it anyway.
Okay, so it's asking you to recode a particular variable into a variable, and basically what it's saying is that you're using very valuable information available on people who are not included in these variables, if that makes sense. And it's telling us why, because people who are originally coded as not applicable for that particular variable, looks like they have some plus many or lots. So what it's asking you to do is basically just theoretically, what would the best way to treat those observations should be?
Right.
Is there a way to include the missing cases in the new variables?
I understand for the sake of this question, we don't really have to compute these variables.
Okay.
But so I understand. I know I can still answer the question without actually going, actually computing them, because I can look into them individually and can see how many they're missing and whatnot. But for the sake of the question, I couldn't even compute them anyway. Even following like question 5 in the text, I couldn't do that.
Okay.
You know what it says for num op sex is what the thing we're trying to create for number of opposite sex partners. So if I follow chapter 4, I think it's page 97. I've got a scam on my computer.
Oh yeah. Okay, so chapter 4 is the top.
Yeah, number 97, page 97.
Okay.
You see where it says to do this, use the recode into new variable to create a new variable, and basically the spot that I get stuck with is specify num op sex as the output variable.
Okay, let's go through it here. Okay. So our goal is to create this variable. To do this, we're going to recode it into a new variable. Okay. And we're going to do the if. All right. Now, if I recall, this is one of your homework assignments, right?
Question 5 is not. It's only question 2 and 7 is actually the homework. Okay. But question 7 kind of it refers to this, basically saying, what's missing. And again, I know I don't really have to compute it because I can talk about what to do with them anyway. But I was trying to compute it and I couldn't do it, and it was driving me crazy. Yeah. So I'm glad this wasn't one of the questions.
All right, give me just a sec.
Okay.
I'm just trying to while we do it.
Yeah, this is exactly what I did, and it wouldn't let me do it.
appreciate that.